Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out about Elizabeth Barrett Browning. But the habit of miscarriages is indeed hard to break. A fortnight after she mailed the letters, Elizabeth loses the baby. Possibly the bleeding she's experienced was a sign that the pregnancy was already lost or inviable. Yet again, she seems not quite bereft. Possibly she can't imagine a new kind of love to revival her grand amour. As she wrote to Miss Mitford while she was still pregnant, of course, it would be natural to be rather anxious. It is no more or less than a woman. Still, it strikes me often, if I have no right to ask for more, Robert has the dear goodness to say that he never could love a child as he loves his wife. Perhaps God should keep his gifts of children for such women as have missed something of the ideal love. And there's always poetry to absorb her energy and emotion. A meditation of Tuscany, the long political poem she's been working on and now sends to Blackwoods, includes impressions recycled from her letters. And all the thousand windows which had cast a ripple of silks in blue and scarlet down, as if the houses overflowed at last, seeming growing larger with fair heads and eyes, at which the stones seemed breaking into thanks and rattling up the sky. Such sounds in proof arose, the very house walls seemed to bend. The very windows up from door to roof flashed out a rapture of bright heads. This is a politics of crowd scene. Even the writing is crowded. It is transferred into epitaphs, their fluidity mimicking the fast-changing revolutionary scene. We see the idea of Italy, abstract, historical, brought to life by the people. Il popolo, the word means dukedom, empire, majesty. For Elizabeth, the ideal of a free society is inseparable from the vibrant physicality of daily Florentine life. Revolutionary enthusiasm is all mixed up with personal experience. These initial 18 months in Italy are for the first sustained chance to enjoy bodily autonomy and the vivid sensuality of the outdoor life. Since there are 14-year-old tomboy, even her pregnancy is a sign that she's not more or less than a woman than the black-eyed mothers with their children in the streets. Warm climate, Italian food, novel surroundings, and the sexiness of the new marriage have all contributed to the bodily resurrection. Elizabeth's grief for passionate imaginative identification has always been more attractive. As Uncle Sam remarked decades ago, she has a gift of love. Now her ardent optimistic, a meditation reverberates with the poet's own rigoromento as it portrays embodied tombs and compares the ruined architecture of Italy's historical reputation with the resurrected national future. Blackwoods eventually turns down the grand poem in the insular British grounds that these are foreign affairs, incomprehensible without extensive footnotes. But Elizabeth's own attitude is changing anyway as she and Robert become increasingly anxious about the influence of French revolutionary politics in the Italian quest for independence. It's all very well that the leaders of the French Second Republic, declared on February 26, include their fellow poet Alphonse de la Maritime, but the Brownings are liberal, not socialists. For them, France's 1848 revolution is frightening. It realizes some of the socialist philosophers, Charles Fourier and anarchist Pierre-Joseph Proudhon's utopian idea about cooperative organizations, along with Louis Blanc's Droit de travail, the right to work, and really we are not communists. Elizabeth finds herself reassuring Kenyon, nothing can be more hateful to me than this communist idea of quenching the individualities of the mass. Revolution is self-determination, not appeal, and Elizabeth understands individualism, not least because she herself has labored to achieve life. Life develops from within, and she'll put it in Aurora Lee 7 years from now. And she knows at first how easily individual human flowering can be blocked. And if the hope of the world did not always consist in the eliciting of the individual human, but like most people who don't have to earn a living, she doesn't understand economic bondage. Unless what Elizabeth calls matters of maternal life and arranged differently, whoever rules Italy, the laboring poor, will become desperate, the small traders worse off than bankers and bishops. Sure enough, in the Communist Manifesto, which is published in London this very month, February 1848, Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, aimed this critique not at grand dukes, but at exploitive business owners like her own family. Elizabeth rather resembles the second-generation romantics in whose steps she so admirably treads, but being moved by the idea of liberty, but falling to see her own privilege is complicit in denying it to the many, it remains elusively the case of her escape from Wimpole Street was made possibly by slavery money. And in the 21st century, a meditation in Tuscany, which eventually appears in 1851 as part one of Casa Guide Windows, feels lacking in intellectual underpinning. Yet at the midpoint of the 19th century, it is radical, forcing a British readership otherwise protected from those proto-revolutionary scenes into magnative complicity with ordinary Italians. Elizabeth turns the reader into a fellow revolutionary participant by evoking her own enthusiasm and all of its vulnerability rather than hiding behind the conceit of an omniscient narrator. She puts her own self into the frame of advocate, as the Globe and the Traveler will write on the poem's eventual appearance. When the exponent of Italian feelings is the most gifted of England's poetic daughters, the claim on her own country's hearing becomes paramount. Meanwhile, the Brownings household is undergoing its own revolutions. Lateral thinking saves the day when Robert realizes that renting unfurnished is much cheaper than a furnished let. Political crises keep property prices low. He managed to recure the apartment at Palazzo Guidi for just 25 guineas per annum, and the household returns there on May 9th, 48. As Elizabeth tells Arabelle, next summer we shall sublet our apartment for at least £8 a month and return here to the winter to a rent-free residence. With canny furniture shopping, they can create a smart asset with the fun they travel. The carpet is down in the drawing rooms and looks very well. The walls are green, the chairs are crimson with white and gold frames, and the carpet mixes up all the colors. The ceiling has a good deal of gilding in Italian fashion, and the little sitting room in the end of the suite is a very pretty room with a cloud full of angels looking down on you. Of course, you are understanding that the furniture is not new, but it is in good taste and characteristic. But this is also Elizabeth's first opportunity to nest build. We want linen and plate, and then our rooms, being immense, yearned for more and more filling, and then again we grew ambitious, and instead the four legs of our chair we're looking at to gilding and spring seats, and so we have passed 60 pounds and still want curtains. 6 months on, the pleasure, the expenditure are unabated. The bedroom and Wilson's windows are to have the curtains altogether of white muslin, checked in rather a large pattern. 2 or each windows very full, and the bed in the room is hung with the same. There's a new carpet laid down in the bedroom. I wanted to drug it, but the carpet was so cheap and very thick and rich looking. We had bought that for the room in beautiful chest of drawers. Robert brought the other day a companion chest, initially more beautiful. In fact, far too good for any bedroom, ebony and ivory, inlaid with the curious gilded handles, and he gave £2 for it. Furnishings can be resold, but they represent a considerable investment of money and imagination, especially given the panic of war nearby, about the dangers of which Elizabeth seems strangely relaxed. By then, her emotional reaction has always been somewhat disassociated. Around her, much of Europe has been shaken by the fear and promise of revolution, and there has been dramatic uprisings in Vienna and Berlin, as well as in Paris. In March, King Charles Albert of Piedmont, Sardinia, had declined his intention to unite divided Italy under the Pope. He built a local revolt against Habsburg rule in Lombardy, Venetia, by attacking the Australian military headquarters in Quadrato and set a four-cities fortress centered in Verona and Mantua, and just 125 miles from Florence. Joined by Papal, Tuscan, and Sicilian forces for a while, his campaign went well. 2 fortresses fell, but in May, the Pope Pius IX became nervous about challenging the mighty Australian Empire, which is also Catholic, and withdrew his support, as did Ferdinand II of the 2 Sicilies. Australian Field Marshal Count Radetzky will finally defeat the Italian forces in August after a 3-month siege of Venice and become Viceroy of Lombardy, Venetia for almost a decade. These are bloody battles, not just street demonstrations, and it's hard to avoid the feelings that Elizabeth's determination to build a new life willy-nilly in such a time and place is not just wistful, but irrational. For there's another fly in the ointment. Robert isn't writing. For him, marriage has exchanged and extended adolescence at its writing desk day and night for adult practical, even if not financial, household responsibilities. And neither Browning is under any illusion that he's currently the more distinguished partner. And while it's exciting to be adored by the author of poems you love with all your heart, it's altogether different to make a life of the lesser writer. Robert is, in effect, playing the partner, the conflicted role to which traditionally artistic and literary partnerships relegate the woman. But however unorthodox the couple's domestic roles, bodily or still bodies, in June 1848, just after their return to Palazzo Guidi, Elizabeth falls pregnant again. When again she feels very well that she's carried on as usual. In mid-July, she and Robert escape the city on Un Bel Giro, alone first together on the coast of Fano, and then from the proves altogether dreary, south down the Adriatic coast to Ancona. Here they stay for a week, and Robert at last writes a poem. And even this signals that all is not well. The depressive narrator of The Guardian Angel, a picture of Fano, is accompanied, like Robert himself, by a lover. Despite this, he identifies with Guercino, the little squinter, painter of the sentimental 17th century altarpiece in the town, and prays for the angelic guardianship it portrays. 8 stanzas include by breaking the fourth wall of fictional conceit to appeal to someone from real life, the long-lashed, baby-faced Alfred Domet, who's going to end up flirting with EBB, Alfred Domet, who was Robert's pal about Literary Town before emigrating to New Zealand in 1842. Who, you dear old friend? Who are you? How rolls the Warora at your world's fair end? Is this Akana? Yonder is the sea. So what's going on here? A later years, Donnet will publish a verse epic, Randolph and Amoia, celebrating Maora culture, and his real skill is in public office. He has the restless, slightly misfit energy that does well in new enterprises and will become New England's 4th premier in 1862 and 63 when he retires to England, when then 2 decades from now, the old friends will unite after an emotional message from Robert. I never could bear to answer the letter you sent me years ago, though I carried it always about with me, feeling which it turned out to have been deep-seated to when Domet left England, Robert declared. I cannot say nothing of my constant thoughts about you, most pleasant remembrances of you, earnest desires for you, yet I will write freely what I dare say. I said niggardly enough, my real love for you and better love that I had supported I was fit for, there and now let that lie till we meet again. Even though his friends didn't respond for a year and a half, Robert intended to send long, affectionate missives about intensity, only abated after he met Elizabeth, which would matter little in 1848, except that another figure, when Robert's bachelor days, is about to enter Elizabeth's life and for a while turn her evenings to ashes. The Fano poem may well be triggered by post-viral depression. Robert hasn't completely shaken off the summer flu, even as the couple completes their 3-week trip by visiting Rimini and Ravenna, where they spend pre-dawn hours at Dante's tomb. A tour gives Elizabeth yet more Italy to fall in love with for exquisite, almost visionary scenes of the Apennines, the wonderful variety of shapes and colors, the sudden transitions and vital individuality of those mountains, the chestnut forests, drop by their own weight into the deep ravines. Flesh enjoys himself too, especially in towns. He looks east, he looks west. He would conclude that he was taking notes on preparing them. His eagerness to get into the carriage first used to amuse the Italians, but Robert remains under par. Back home, he develops a severe throat infection for 3 weeks. He and a high fever and a pain keeps him awake, and it becomes increasingly painful to take anything by mouth. Gradually loses strength, and yet he refuses to see a doctor. So it seems like sheer luck when, at the 3rd week of September, a literary bachelor friend, the Reverend Friar Francis Sylvester Mahoney, who's going to end up flirting with EBB as well, calls unexpectedly. Seeing the state Robert's in, Mahoney forces him to drink an impoverished concoction of egg yolks and heated port wine that, in helping the feverish patient to sleep, is key to his cure. At last, this is the story according to Mahoney, who styles himself as Father Prout and encourages the belief that he is the one of the Jesuit orders, most active members of the constant employment, holding high trust, and who had actually been working in the Rome correspondent of the Daily News since 1846. In fact, Elizabeth records of Mahoney's famous hot drink merely that her husband was the better for sleeping after it. Robert's actual recovery from that, his nervous symptoms, is a quinsy comes when the abscess becomes a tonsil burst. Relief came at last by the breaking of something in the throat and by nearly a wine glass full of matter coming up. No matter, the talkative and energetic, but also vulgar and cynical, Reverend Father now invites himself to the Palazzo Guidi drawing room to smoke every day, sometimes twice a day, and generally for 2 hours at a time, walking up and down in the room and performing an acceleration of expectorations, now in the fireplace and now on our new carpet. This would be revolting at the best of times, but Robert is breathing the smoke through an infected throat, and pregnant Elizabeth is nauseated. Catastrophe is nearly occurring as possible. Though an ascending of the personality in commodity, he plants himself close to the sofa, smokes at leisure 2 or 3 cigars, takes one of our Raphael basins for a spitting convenience, and last night, not at the first time by any means, both Robert and I were fairly sick. Where he had gone between 10 and 11, we opened windows and doors and relieved ourselves by swearing gently. By November 22nd, after 2 months of this performance every night but one, Mahoney's disagreeableness is beginning to pass as agreeableness. He calls Elizabeth a regular child, a bambino, my dear. She is his little dear. In his first visit, the dearest on the second, so that, as I told Robert, I fully expected to be kissed on the third. I shan't be asked whether I allow it or not. He hijacks the intimate nickname Ba and mocks his hostess for having shyly pulled down her traveling veil when he intercepted the couple at their first arrived in Livermore. The evenings are spent in conversation primarily between the men, and there's no undercurrent of misogyny to this dismissal of someone who has increasingly been seen as Britain's greatest living woman poet, and since almost of trying to recruit Robert back to a bachelor cause. Mahoney is just 2 years older than Elizabeth and lives precisely the kind of literary life from which gender excludes her. Since the 1830s, she's been a prolific columnist, for example, in Fraser's magazine. There he hobnobbed the Le Trout Monde, including surviving second-generation romantics Thomas Jefferson Hogue and Thomas Medwin. Another Fraserian is Robert's mentor, William Makepeace Thackeray, whose masterpiece Vanity Fair, very clever, very effective, but cruel to human nature, has just recently finished lengthy serialization in Punch. It will be apparent to everyone at Palazzo Guidi that if there is a Vanity Fair of the literary world, Mahoney belongs there. But does Robert belong there too? Elizabeth's writing life has been disproportionately inner, and her occasional sentimentiness reveals she's sheltered and high-minded, as in fact is just what she represents to Robert. I want to be a poet, the angel of my life, as he wrote to her towards the culmination of their courtship, when he was finding the dullness mortal of the kind of literary soirees he'd hitherto enjoyed. I am far from my ordinary self. Oh, to be with you, Ba, onlookers. Mahoney may possibly, among them, assume this difference is the fault line in the marriage. But the couple aren't young ingenues. They understand each other. Perhaps they recognize how each can help each other experience a fuller writing life. As Elizabeth, formerly so shy, now falls easily into literary socializing, society by flashes is the brightest way of having it, as Robert picks up her poetic techniques. Still, Mahoney's arrival at Palazzo Guidi is a signal of some kind. It's in fourth in what would be a quite remarkable chain of coincidences. Roberts laughed a little as he told me that in crossing Poland Street with our passport just as that crisis, he met Father Prout, and I said, curious, and the conversation changed. On our landing at Leghorn at 9 o'clock in the morning, our boat, which was rowed from the steamer to the shore, passed close to the bar, just piecing a rock in which stood a man wept in a cloak, and he's also having just landed. Robert cried out, good heaven, there he is again. There's Father Prout. He went in the inn and breakfasted, and breakfast, the Reverend Lyon came into the room. There's already seems almost too good to be true. And there's a third coincidence. The day last November, when Robert, full of flirtatious high spirits, came bounding back to the Villa delle Belladone to announce that Mahoney had bumped into him in the street, taken him for coffee, and kissed him full on the mouth. Now the journalist priest had turned up the Palazzo Guidi, where someone who has given him the address. Mr. Jameson says he is the dearest of cleverest talkers, and that Robert is nearly the only man in the world whom he'll speak well of. Perhaps being based in Rome means that Mahoney has starved for English literary talks. But at this point, we need to cock an ear to Mary Russell Mitford's gossip. In 1847, she thought back 11 years to 1836, when the opening night party at Noon Talford's Ion. There, as she confided to the travel writer Charles Boner, she met Mr. Browning, and remembered thinking how exactly he resembled a girl dressed in boy's clothes, had long ringlets and no neckcloth, and seemed to me the height and size of the boy of 12 years old. Feminilite is a word made for him, a strange sort of person to carry such a woman as Elizabeth Barrett Browning off her feet. Every generation misreads the dandyism of the next, and as an ambitious young poet, Robert tried hard to establish the bohemian persona, but Mitford is taking a stronger claim than this. In Malice, as she admits, in the 1880s, feminite will be eminently used in French, which she speaks fluently, to indicate sexuality, rather than English 20th century uses as effeminate. But in the first half of the 19th century, desire of all kinds is much less socially acknowledged than it will become, and sodomy in particular is illegal, which is why the 1816 legal separation case divulging Byron's proclivities led to his exile. Prohibition creates an innocence around same-sex friendships that allows them to include behavior like declarations of love and bed sharing that could be anachronistically misinterpreted as sexual, but exactly the same reason is also allows same-sex love to be acted out in plain sight despite the social conventions, and whether or not both participants realize it. So might Robert, the feminilite, ever have experience with bisexuality or attracted crushes? The possibility will traditionally be ignored. After all, the Brownings share a passion that clearly sexual as well as romantic, but bisexuality isn't disapproved by a great love affair with an individual of either sex. Also, Robert has long held a condemned Shakespearean bisexuality. In fact, such his much cited debate is with William Wordsworth, not Shakespeare, concerned literary biography. That sexuality goes like this. In 1827, Wordsworth epitomized scorn, not the sonnet, called Shakespeare's notoriously sexually ambiguous sonnets a key with which he unlocked his heart. But this is a conversational characterization of sonnet form itself, not of the particular sexuality, and nearly 4 decades later, Robert's 1876 poem House will retort what it's wrong to read any poetry as confessional. 'Tis the fall of its frontage permits you feast. On the inside arrangement you praise or blame. Outside you should suffice for evidence. With this same key, Shakespeare unlocked his heart. Did Shakespeare? If so, the less Shakespeare he. This is a reflection on literary celebratory of a 64-year-old whose life has been marked for it by 30 years, not writing about the desire of any kind, all of which matters because of what it leaves open in late 1848. In the background of the Palazzo Guidi drawing room, the young Alfred Daumet can be missed the strength of feelings that the young Robert waited till his departure to the ends of the earth to declare that he proves nothing. Best friendship can be intense, addictive. Mahoney is another matter altogether. Bon viveur, yet a long line celibate. When it comes to women, a priest ordained against the Spiritual Advisors Council, the formerly brilliant seminarian expels for drunken socializing with his students. He seems like knowing to know exactly what and whom he desires. Does this cross Elizabeth's mind as he sits in the green drawing room watching the clock and making sure his spittoon is on hand? Probably not. With her father's literal mindlessness, mindedness about religion. She takes Mahoney, alleged priesthood, as guarantee that he must be a better man than he appears. Besides, she's pregnant, just 2 years married and very much in love, with a certainty that's helped her brave parental abandonment, storms at sea, miscarriage, and the risk of social stigma. Compared to all this, some flirting with the man who loves her is just the faint buzz of Florentine mosquito. And of course, in the end, she wins. Eventually, Mahoney leaves. Elizabeth may be naive, but she is tough. She has coped well with Robert's illness. Her respect for his refusal to call a doctor isn't handwriting weakness, but self-denial by someone who understands intimately a patient's right to self-determination. I would have sent to Dr. Harding without asking him, but he would never do such things to me. He often to me that he could not treat me so without confidence, whatever his own feelings might be. He looks after her husband in other ways too. On the October 9th, kneeling on the Fatel de pray, she had a nasty and slightly ridiculous fall into the tile department floor. Her nose and forehead bled, and she quickly, to reassure the recuperating Robert, to confining her true feelings of anxiety that this may have endangered her pregnancy too, letters home. With wilfulness is part of the burgeoning strength. By November, the baby is kicking. The second life is distinctly appreciable now. The insertion of now gores and letting of the waistbands goes on steadily, and the appetite is good, and the strength keeping up, and the morphine diminishing. Time change, and while some changes, including Hugh Stuart Boyd's death in May, are sad but are exciting. Elizabeth is cutting out morphine, about nearly 30 years of dependency. The household has acquired a cook, Alessandro, whose snobby drives Wilson mad, but the maid herself, our friend rather than our servant, has become engaged in a matter of the ducal guard, who plans to take a palace clerkship in order to marry her. Through, in fact, we will open a shop. Tall and good-looking Signor Regali is the educated young son of a doctor, his brother a wealthy merchant by near Prato, with town and country house. It's a relationship between religious lines, but if Wilson were to become Signora Riti, she is almost as well off as the Brownings themselves. Palazzo Guidi has become the real home, as full of life of any soap opera set. Shortly then the household is completed. Elizabeth will rename it Casa Guidi. As she turns 43, she's in her prime. And to cap it all, on March 9th, 1849, 3 days after her birthday, she gives birth to a healthy little boy. Through the labor is fairly long, 21 hours, during the whole of which time she never once cried out or shed a tear. It's a shorter than her first miscarriage, and Elizabeth's years of struggle with her body have repaired her for it. At 2:15 in the morning, the very model of a beautiful boy is born. The nurse says that the baby, stato ben nutro, as well nourished has been. Robert had stayed with Elizabeth, holding her hand as much of the laboring as Dr. Harding, the midwife, Madame Biondi, and Wilson, who were all in attendance, and will allow, as I am comforted myself by pulling his head nearly off. For her, the first cry came to me in the rapture of a surprise. It has always seemed to me reasonable to expect some evil about the child. Malformation is nothing else, but Robert, whose proud announcement of the birth appears in the Times on March 19th, is in no doubt that it's the reward for her perfect goodness, patience, self-denial, and general rationality. The resolution of leaving off the morphine, for instance. In fact, the healthy late childbearing is also in the family genes. Soon Henrietta will give birth 3 times between the ages of 42 and 47 to 2 sons and a daughter. The little fellow grows prettier and bigger visibly daily, and the new mother thrives too, and Robert records the exuberance. Through her milk has come in, she follows custom by choosing not to breastfeed. In the first week, 3 ballet or wet nurses don't work out, but by March 18th, a 14th Tecla Calavini has been engaged, the mighty woman who would cut up into 20 bas, age 26, with a child not yet a month old, good-natured and intelligent, despite the fat cheeks and her overflow. Her neck, as she bends down, will remain with the Brownings for over 2 years. But the date she arrives has a double significance. Early in the pregnancy, when Robert was ill, Elizabeth had written to Miss Mitford, "Nobody has ever born to be happier or unhappier than I. The mingled yarn is black and white. Now the mingled yarn knots tight, for in the day Tekla rise, Robert's beloved mother dies of a heart attack without having ever met her daughter-in-law or known that she has a grandchild. From elation at the birth, Robert cries into a depressive grief just because he was too happy when the child was born. The pain was overwhelming afterwards. While he was full of joy for the child, his mother was dying at a distance, and the very thought of accepting that new affection for the old became a thing to recoil from. This may be any case from been something fragile about the slightly hyperactive joy, for Robert's sense of his own continues to take a battering. In January, Chapman and Hall published his selected poems, omitting both Strafford and the drama he wrote for Macready, The Sordello, the long poem which in 1840 destroyed his precociously brilliant reputation. As Miss Mitford says, behind Elizabeth Back, his poetry is now regularly dismissed as one heap of obscurity, confusion, and weakness. Book upon book, all bad, the first edition of each having gone off in the form of waste paper. Critics are slow to change the pigeonhole, and poems' reception is poor. The Eclectic Review rakes up Sordello to review alongside it, while the Atlantis opens with the prodigious mistake before going on to the delicate. The review is a pit-nicking appraisal of Robert's revisions. The English Review claims the poems are immoral, and that, for example, Papa Passes advocates suicide, and while the book receives serious glowing reviews from John Forrester, the Examiner, among the several positive notices in the U.S., Edwin Percy Whipple in Graham's American Monthly and Morning Post is swinging. We have searched in vain for a single passage that would pass our author in a favorable light, because the public, we feel, no small degree of mortification in having wasted so much profitable time in a pursuit which has proved so unpleasant and abortive. Small wonder, perhaps, that the loss of his mother, that loving, unconditional admirer, overwhelms Robert. Worries about Elizabeth giving birth abroad have been triumphantly assuaged, but this sudden bereavement underscores the couple's distance from home. The distance helped Serena keep back the news until the baby was safely born, but now it breaks apart familiar supportive structures. Elizabeth advises her own sisters not to visit the sister-in-law with support and condolences, lest Papa create a row and intensify Soriana's sufferings. Robert is no longer wants to take a trip to England because his mother was so longingly anxious to have us back again. We waited till it was just too late for our return to make her happy. The new mother swallows down her disappointment. She won't be able to show off her baby to her sisters. Things are so bad that by early May, she relieved that Robert was still going through the motions with his baby and goes to see him bathed every morning and walks up and down in the terrace with him in his arms. As he tells Soriana, if your dear father can toss and rock babies as Robert can, he will be a nurse in great favor. It seems only logical to help her husband by reinforcing the positive, so she decides that the baby should take her late mother-in-law's maiden name. Is christened Robert Weedham Barrett Browning on June 26 in the Evangelical Church, and Elizabeth insists he'd be known as Weedman, though before he turns 3, the irrepressible Barrett habit of nicknames will have transformed this to Penn, a name which sticks for the rest of his life. 4 days after the christening, the household, including Wilson, who becomes the baby's nursemaid, the Balia and Flush, set out for Bagna de Lucca, where they've tented to apartment in Casa Valera on hills above Bagni Caldi. They've decamped in the summer of the Italian style, but also because Robert is still in a bad way. In fact, he is depressed that Elizabeth has been forced the issue. The truth was there was a necessity for our going. His nerves were unstrung, and he began to leave off eating altogether. They're following where the Shelleys summered a quarter century ago. Indeed, earlier in June, they also checked out Percy Blythe Shelley's last home, La Spezia, in the Ligurian coast near Leghorn, but despite the most exquisite and various country, found the pieces enormous, and in any case, Bagna de Lucca is beautiful in ways that speak touchingly of Cope End. You may take some suggestion of it from Malvern. There is a throng of mountains, much higher, of course, and more romantic than the Worcestershire Hills, the chestnut woods running up them perpendicularly, and pretty bright village with a scattering of villa residences, borrowing their rabbits like the clefts of the rocks. Look up here is good. Weedman thrives, plays with Flush's ears, and talks to him. By the way, I forgot to tell you that I can't help calling him Flush and Flush Baby, as Robert is apt to make the same mistake. Elizabeth has put on so much weight that she's grown the image of Henrietta and enjoys long walkings in the surrounding hills. Before they leave Bagna de Lucca, she has fallen pregnant again. She's restored. Is she that she does now finally does something she has resisted for years, revealing to Robert the sonnet sequence she wrote during their courtship. Relaxed and sure of herself, perhaps she no longer sees the point of keeping them secret in a relationship that inevitably more or less warts at all, or maybe she wants gently to remind her partner of the love of the heart of their great adventure. Romance can't heal bereavement, but Robert's seems to need a fresh injection of joy. In the 21st century, these immaculate sonnets will be best known legacy. But in 1849, Elizabeth had nothing but instinct to go on as to whether they work, and the emotional risk she's running a considerable. If they fail as poetry, there's something fundamental to their poet's love. Much will be damaged, for in them Elizabeth is again being radical, this time by stepping into the first person to speak in the literary masculine. In the 19th century, the sonnet is still a form expressing male desire, even if it's not always heterosexual. Think Michelangelo, if not indeed Shakespeare. Can it adapt itself to female experience? And what could adopting this form to do the balance of her femininity with Robert's masculinity? Of course, Elizabeth is not the first woman to write a sonnet. Her English precursors include the 16th century Lady Mary Wroth, also famous, the Countess of Montgomery Rainier, and the first prose romantic known to be a woman, the poet-novelist Charlotte Turner Smith, who died the year Elizabeth was born, and his sustained investigation of form and feeling is unique. The most famous penultimate poem of the sequence transforms long literary tradition into ultimate immediacy. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, and I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need by sun and candlelight. I think we shall leave this love story for another day. Seems like they're getting along better. They're having children now, and they're enjoying their lives as a happy couple. That's the American dream, is it not? We pray for love and peace in the world. And if you think there's any truth to what's going on here as to what happened 300 years ago, have a like and enjoy a nice day.